that you are enough to be who you want to be. And to create what you want to create, you have to make sure that beyond the intention that you put out there, you put action to support the intention. We don't have enough time to go through all the obstacles.
All right.
First of all, I'm happy that I'm here, and thank you for inviting me. It's always a wonderful opportunity to spend time with your community, to just share thoughts, ideas, in some cases experiences that might be helpful to others of you, as you go on your journey. I mean, I am still on my journey, as you could all well imagine. And to some degree, I just recall many conversations I had when I was, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 15, 20 years old, with people with gray hair like I have now. And I kind of half listened, but sometimes the half listening actually imparted something that made a big difference later on in my life. And what I will try to do is spend some time today to give you a little bit of a recitation of the narrative of my life, and to how it has helped me become the person I am and the man I am, and how I think about it in creating an opportunity for my family and my community to enjoy the fruits of what America does provide. In spite of what I call the fractious nature of what we see today in America, it is still the greatest country in the world, quite frankly, for opportunity. And if you travel the world like I do, and I probably go to 40, 50 countries a year, you start to really understand that this is one of the few places where we have on-ramps to opportunity that other places don't. And in some cases, we don't see those on-ramps as prevalent in our communities. And so part of what our role here is to force those on-ramps to emerge, and create them when we can, and demand them when they are withheld. And so part of what the elders of this community have to do is make sure that they are never silent in demanding those on-ramps. And part of you as youth have to understand is when those on-ramps become present, to take advantage of every step along the way, because there has been a lot of blood, sweat, tears, and literal blood, to put those on-ramps and make them available for you to launch into what is the greatest economic opportunity on the planet, which is in America. So part of what I'd like to do here today is go through a little bit of a narrative, talk a little bit about how I think about things, and frankly really just want to answer questions. I think that is what's going to be most helpful. The youth today, you have to remember, I still kind of think of myself as 17 years old. And those who are young are like, what are you talking about? But those of you who are my age say, yeah, I feel exactly the same way. In seeing that there's so much ahead of us and so much opportunity, but part of that is to also think about where you are in the present and what steps you need to take to get to where you want to go. And I am constantly moving forward on that. Let me give you a little bit of background and history. I grew up in Colorado. I'm the 4th generation in my family from Colorado. We've been there since the 1860s. Half of us were marched out there unwillingly in the 1860s. The other half kind of migrated up from Texas and parts of Kansas in that period of time, and we settled in this little town called Pueblo, Colorado, which, as you can imagine, there weren't very many of us there as African Americans. But one of the things you learn when you grow up in a place like Denver, Colorado, and is that the strength of your community is critically important in terms of helping you understand, A, who you are, B, how to get to where you want to go. I come from a long line of educators, school teachers, and in some cases they found themselves with the highest level of education. Both of my parents had what we called, doctorates, EDDs in education. Hard fought, hard won, in the 60s and the 70s, as you can imagine. And I remember being in elementary school when I was probably 6 or 7 or 8 years old, where they were actually first starting to desegregate the school system. Prior to that, it was segregated. All the black kids went to black schools and white kids went to white schools, and that's what it was. My father was actually a principal at the neighborhood school, which was literally 6 blocks from my house, but they decided to desegregate, so I had to now get on a bus and travel about 45 minutes to go to school every morning, which means we got up at 5:45 in the morning. I had to go clean up my dad's car, my mom's car, all that happy stuff, and then get to school. Now, the interesting thing about that was once I was at school after about 2 or 3 years, and these kids who didn't look like me figured out that I wasn't that bad of a person, I every now and then got invited to their homes for like a birthday party. And when I went to those houses, I found out their houses were a lot bigger than mine. They had nicer stuff than we had. They had better cars than we had. And when I actually found out what their parents did, their parents actually were no more educated than my parents. In fact, they were a lot less educated than my parents. And so the conundrum in my mind was my parents always told me, get a great education. And that was an important part of life. And I said, okay, great. But then I looked and said, well, you guys have this great education, but yet we live worse off than they do. And that's when it hit me for the first time, how in America, education is not enough, especially for us as African Americans. You also need to have access to the economy. And so as I'm now going from elementary school to middle school to high school, I started to actually think about, well, what is access to the economy? Why did they live in that great house? And their father is a contractor, but owns his own contracting business. And yet down the street, I had a friend, his father worked for a contractor, but didn't own his own contracting business. They lived near us. And when I looked at that, I said, part of what has to happen, and in my mind was I wanted to become a business owner. And that was early on. So literally, I started my first business when I was probably 9 or 10 years old. I was selling golf balls and I, cut grass. I did all those sorts of things because the fact of the matter is I actually didn't like wearing my brother's clothes until I was 14 years old. I wore hand-me-downs basically until that period of time. And I don't know if any of you have experienced that, but kids can be cruel in some respects, but part of that also hardens you to help you understand and help you to reach some of your goals. And part of my goal was to be part of an economic class in America where I could buy my own clothes, the ones I wanted, and buy the shoes that I wanted, and go the places I wanted. And one of the advantages of, again, having parents who wanted me to read and forced me to read, I got a chance to read a number of things. And one of the things that inspired me early in my life was actually, believe it or not, the James Bond novels. Because as I read them, they took me and transported me to places that I had no idea actually really existed. And if you've ever seen any of those movies, they characterize them in these movies, and I was like, wow, this is pretty terrific. I want to figure out a way to actually get to that place. And that is part of the impetus behind me working hard and also driving myself to go figure out how to create an opportunity that I could actually make big and lasting and have an impact. And so as I then started going into high school, computers were just now getting introduced in our economy. And I heard about this place called Bell Labs where they invented the transistor. And they had a Bell Labs in it was outside of Denver, but in the state. And I called the human resources director when I was a junior in high school. And I said, hey, I'd like to get a job at Bell Labs. And I said, do you have summer internships? And they said, well, if you're between your junior and senior year in college, we have internships. And I said, that's fantastic. I'm a junior in high school. I'm taking AP classes. I'm getting all A's in them. It's just like being in college. And the woman said, no, it isn't. And I called that human resources director every day for 2 weeks. And this is in the month of January. And she stopped taking the calls after the second day. But I left a message every single day for 2 weeks. I then called her every Monday for 5 months. And finally, I got a call back in June. And she called and she said, hey, listen, and she called, my dad happened to be home at the time. And he said, hey, this woman from Bell Labs called you and said she'd like you to call her back. I'm like, wow, okay. So I called her back. She said, listen, a student from MIT didn't show up. And I'm not guaranteeing you anything, but we have an extra slot for the summer. So why don't you come and let's interview you and, we'll see what happens. So of course, I get the one suit that I owned and put it on and the one white shirt that I had. And at the time, I bought my first car when I was 15, and my mom got mad and wouldn't let me drive it till I was 16. But, got that thing working, put $2 of gas in, which gas was probably 40 cents a gallon then, and drove to Bell Labs and got a job at Bell Labs when I was 17 years old. And then the world just opened up for me. You all have these things in your pockets, cell phones. I saw the first mobile phone over 30 years ago. The first video phone over 30 years ago in one of these laboratories. And I said, wow, this is where the world is going. And I have an opportunity to understand how these things are made, not just to consume them, but as I like to think about it, have an opportunity to upload into the economy and not download, right? Because if you're uploading, you're making money. If you're downloading, you are spending it and someone else is making it. And I got that experience when I was 17 years old, and I said, at that point, I knew that in the world at least I lived in, intelligence can create huge profits. And in fact, you can actually make more money being smart than you can being strong or fast. Okay? And so the importance of developing intellectual property cannot be underestimated. Because I want you to think about something. Intellectual property, no one else can take that from you. Point number one, if you manage it right. Point number two, it is constantly evolving and it actually takes no capital. If I'm going to go in the real estate business, it takes me a whole lot of money to go buy a building and get in the real estate business. Intellectual property, I just have to think through how it actually works and then develop it. And that's what really launched me on the path to saying, you know what? As good as I thought I was playing football and all those wonderful things, and my mom was a wonderful governor to my ambitions. She said, you're a far better scholar than you are athlete, which kind of hurt my feelings at the time. But she was absolutely right. And I started to turn my attention to what I call developing my mind. So from that, I now have what I call 3 sayings that we use and I drive in my kids and to help them think about life. And we have 3 rules, and I call them Dad's rules. And the first rule is you are enough. And I hope they realize, and hopefully I'll share this with you, that you are enough to be who you want to be. And to create what you want to create, you have to make sure that beyond the intention that you put out there, you put action to support the intention. Don't say, I want to be a millionaire, but don't take the activities to do it. Or I want to be the best at something, but don't practice it. It's important to understand that you are enough piece is, put in the vision, have the vision of what you want to become, but you have to put consistent action behind that vision in order for that to manifest. And it has to be consistent. I had the good fortune, I was invited here by one of my fraternity brothers, Louis Tobias, and I remember many a day, Louis and I, Friday night, we're going to go to the party, and we went to the party, and we finished at the party at 2:30, and 3 o'clock, we were back studying so that we could do well on an exam on Monday. It is the importance of knowing that it's your own intention and your power and your actions that can actually lead to, the outcome that is good, that you want to have manifest. The second rule that we call Dad's rules is discover the joy of figuring things out. In this world, and the importance of actually, going through the process of understanding what the problem is and then figuring it out yourself. And every now and then you need some help, that's fine. But if you get too much help, you never figure out how to do things. And you don't develop the grit. And some of the older folks in this audience are shaking their heads. Yeah, you gotta have grit. And grit means getting turned away from things 14, 15 times, calling someone every 2 weeks, every day for 5 months, and then finally it materializing in something that you want. And discovering the joy of figuring things out means, fight through those problems. Understand and learn how you address those problems and come up with the answers to those problems in a solution that is uniquely yours. That's an important part of growing up and solving problems, because if you can't solve easy problems now, you will not be able to solve difficult problems later. And the last thing is love is all that matters. You need to make sure that you love yourself, your family, and those in your community, but you cannot let that love hold you back. But you have to let that love empower you. And so those are kind of the three lessons that I want to impart. Question around how much of it do I give to God? All of it. Because here's what you have to understand, and what I understood early on in life was, when I really think about and talk about the manifestation of my life, it's a manifestation of prayer. Okay? I put deep prayer in every single moment of every day about what I want to manifest in my life. And that has been my journey for over 30 years. I learned something many, many years ago, that if you actually create an idea in your mind, speak that idea, okay, into the universe, into God's ear, and make sure that your actions are consistent with that idea, it manifests. Now, sometimes it doesn't necessarily manifest in the form that you think you want it, but it often manifests in a form that's better than what you ever imagined. You have to be open to recognizing it, okay? That is an important part of understanding, what God's power and what God's love is. In terms of tithing, I probably this year, just to give you an example, have, between me and the foundation that I'm president of, have donated well over $150 million to our community. From the United Negro College Fund, STEM programs, Cornell University, Susan G. Komen. These are, for African American, for breast cancer. These are an important part of, frankly, what has made me successful. Is every year, and if you ever go on my website, I'm probably one of the only private equity firms in the world that actually has a communities page on our website, where I demonstrate to not only my partners in my organization, but everyone, the importance of giving back to your community. You have to create on-ramps. Tithing isn't just money, but it is money. Tithing is time, it's energy, it's attention. One of the recent ties that my wife and I now have is with aging out foster care kids. So when you turn 18, or when you graduate from high school, believe it or not, you're kicked out of the foster care system. And during Christmas, they don't have a place to go. So now we've opened up our ranch, and this past winter we had 10, and we're going to ramp up to 50, that this is where they now spend Christmas. Because, the dorm shut down, they have nowhere to stay. So as you all think about tithing, you have to think about the resources that you have. Sometimes you may not have money to tithe, but you may have an extra bedroom over Christmas that a foster care child can sleep in and not have to go to a homeless shelter or be subjected to the abuses that happen when you are working to go through college and have nowhere to stay. Only 3% of the foster care kids actually graduate from college. And most of them is because they end up with no infrastructure beyond what I'll call the schools. Most states pay for their college, but they don't pay for their housing. They don't pay for places in the state when the dorms are closed down. So think about tithing in a very broad sense, but also think about it very specifically in dollars and cents. I actually grew up in a predominantly black neighborhood, but I ended up going to school in a predominantly white school, okay? So as you all can imagine, and I don't know, how it is in this school district, I was only of one. There were 3 African-American kids in my class from kindergarten, really first grade through 6th grade. 2 boys and 1 girl. So depending upon the semester, either I'm with the other boy or I'm with the girl. And there was only 2 of us in any one of these classes for the first, 5-6 years of my educational experience. What it teaches you is a couple things. One, it teaches you you're more alike than everybody else and you are different. Kids recognize that. Adults don't have the wisdom anymore to understand that. We focus on differences too much as opposed to how we're similar. Now, part of that also does, for me, it helped me understand that if I put the work and the effort in, I could get the same high grade as anyone in my class, no matter what they look like. And if I really applied myself, I could get the highest grade. And that's when you start to develop that sort of grit and understanding that it isn't a function of necessarily how you're viewed at its face, but the work you put in. And in some cases, even the work you put in isn't enough. In those are cases just need to understand that. And then you need to go drive through where it is enough. And that's where I get back to the you are enough. Okay, it's an important part of growing up is to face those obstacles and deal with them and realize not only can you be among the best, but you can be the best. But you have to set it in your mind to do so and put that time and energy and effort in to do that. Yeah, that's a good and a tough question. What I did differently, there's a couple things that I did differently. One of the first things was when I looked at building my company, I decided that I wanted it to be a global business. And when I say that, you have to now think about an infrastructure that's different for a global business and a local business. And I said, okay, one of the first things I said, look, I want to, my goal was to be the best investor of my generation. Period, end of story, full stop. Okay, what does that entail? Well, that entails actually having higher returns with the lowest loss ratio. And so now I needed to figure out a system that accomplished that. So beyond just the desire to hit that goal, it was now I had to put deep thinking into the system that would accomplish that. I spent over a year and a half before I stood up my company working on the architecture of that system. And it is now that system, now 16 years later, that I'm realizing the benefits of. So, look, this doesn't happen quick. And if you want it to last, you have to build pillars on which you can put your business and make it last. A lot of people try to make, call it get rich quick, but you want to be, you want to get rich for a long time is really what your goal is. So build a business and an infrastructure that supports that, which means having, in all honesty, the right business ethics, okay, and finding the right people who understand exactly what it is that you're looking to accomplish, building the right infrastructure behind it, the right legal structures, and frankly, being uncompromising and unwavering in your standards. And, at the end of the day, you got to spend a whole lot of time doing it and executing and perfecting the model. So when I look at other private equity firms that started when I did, who were a fraction of our size with a fraction of the success, when I talked to those partners and listened to them, they had a completely different goal than I did, and they built their businesses different, and then we're relative to their goal. And it kind of gets back to your question, believe it or not, which is, how do you actually sit back and manifest it the way you want? Yeah, you got to think about what God's goodness does provide for you and manifest it the right way. And it has to be consistent with those goals. And guess what? That means a whole lot of time, energy, and effort you have to spend to support that goal through activities. That's very great. So 3 questions, or the 3 habits. The most important habit that I have is to think deeply about what it is I want to accomplish and speak that clearly into the universe. You have to do that in a way, frankly, that doesn't prohibit outcomes that you may not like, but may be better for you. And I'll give you an example. I remember there was one investor who I just wanted them to be an investor in my fund because everyone told me they were great and they were big and all that sort of thing. And ultimately turned me down, and they still have turned me down to this day. It's kind of interesting. Now they're coming back and saying, we really want to be big in your fund. But those who actually, took money from that investor ran into problems for the next 3 years because they actually had problems in the way they did things, right? And so following what I'll call the instinct of knowing God gave me what I needed at the time that I needed it, and what I didn't need was them as an investor because they probably would have caused me problems, okay, for decades to come. So the first one is think clearly, speak it into the universe, and be willing to accept the outcome in the form that it manifests as opposed to trying to shape it. So that's kind of the first thing. The second thing is be willing to do everything in your organization that everyone else does. Like I said, look, I'll serve, I literally do sometimes come in, I'll serve coffee to people or we'll sweep, whatever. It doesn't matter to me. And I tease everyone in my company, like I'm better at every one of their jobs than they are. and I should be. And there is nothing beneath you nor nothing above you in that context, if it is your business and you're building that business. So the second thing is, be willing to do what it takes in your business to be successful, of course, in the guidance of what it is your moral center around what you want to do. And I think the third thing, quite frankly, is, and I laugh a little bit because I'm trying not to do this so much, is get up early. I always get up early. I'm up at 4:35, 5:30 in the morning. I'm trying to stay in bed till 7. That's really hard. But those are golden hours to think clearly, where you're not bombarded by, I'll call it the impact of the day. You wake up in the morning, for me, I've got, 95 emails and, 15 voicemails and messages and all that sort of stuff. And that can actually get you distracted. So in the mornings, it's a golden time to actually, think about what it is that you want to accomplish to support, number one on the list, and what activities you need to do consistent with that. So those are the 3 habits I think that I've continued all my life. So if you think about it, America, to be frank with you, only has 6 real imports, and they're all intellectual property based, right? If you think about it as technology, it's our software, it's our legal system, it's our banking system, it's entertainment. Okay, movies and all that's all into, pharmaceutical development, and that's kind of about it, right? Those are the only real exports we have of mass that make any money that are imports. So intellectual property at the end of the day is really an idea that manifests itself in a business form or construct. Okay, driving in today, we're driving in from the airport, intellectual property may be, okay, I see a number of houses here that can be, renovated. How do I bring capital? The intellectual property might be, can I develop some software app that that matches up people who want to develop houses and people who have money to develop them, right? And houses that are available. So it's any idea that you have that you can manifest in the construct of a business, and how you protect it, quite frankly, is develop it. Point number one, and not to hit the lawyers out here, but you typically have to find some legal help to figure out how you actually make sure that it's A, unique, A, it is different, and B, protectable. Some ideas may not be protectable. So then you just got to, what I call, run fast and do it better than anybody else. Some things are protectable, so you need to make sure you get the right sort of legal protections. But if you don't commercialize them, I don't care how great an idea is, it's not worth it. Outside of you saying the pride if I had it. I tell people, I missed out on my first $1 billion when I was 11 years old, because my brother and I, we lived across the street from the golf course, and it was a city golf course, and everybody used to hit golf balls into our yard. And so we'd pick them up, and then we'd go sell them, and that's how we learned to play golf too. But on the off hours. But we play golf at night, after the last golfer gone on. So it was dusk, 4 o'clock, 5, 6 o'clock, and you couldn't see the ball. So what we started doing is we took them and we started dipping them in fluorescent paint, and we played with these fluorescent paint balls, right? Well, if anybody here has ever seen, that is a multi-billion-dollar industry now. These glowing, these yellow and pink golf balls. We had that idea 40-something years ago. And frankly, we should have manifested there and, created a business around it. And I'm sure one of the golf balls we sold to the golfers that was pink, and somebody said, oh man, we should make this. And they probably made a fortune off of it. But the whole point is, although it was a great idea, we didn't commercialize it at the time. And we missed out on it. But I tease my brother all the time and say, man, you missed out on it. But, part of intellectual property is you have to commercialize it one way or another. That's a great question. I actually speak about this a lot, and I just actually gave a talk to about 1,200 people on this a couple days ago. And I want you all to really listen to this, because this is important. Software is the most productive tool introduced in our business economy in the last 50 years. When I was growing up, we bought airline tickets or checked in and out of hotels or managed, had a blood test done or, got a hotel reservation very differently than it's done now. It's all done through software. And if you are under the age of, frankly, 25, you should be trying to figure out how to learn how to code and how to write code and understand code. And it could be anything from, How do you program, software to keep a power grid stable to run a restaurant better? It is permeating every dimension of our economy, and it is the on-ramp to the economy today. And it's fun. I've got my son and my nephew here, and this past year, we built a computer together for my son, and part of it was, we can buy him a computer. I can actually afford one of those, but the point is, it's important for him to build it and learn about it, and I'm hopeful that he starts to embrace what I call learning how to program. So the reason I moved into software is because A, it's the most productive tool introduced in business economy. Believe it or not, you don't need a lot of money to develop software. If I wanted to go buy a house and develop real estate, I got to have money to go buy a house. If I want to write software code, believe it or not, the computing power is actually available free on the internet. You just got to dial into it and use that computing power to build the products and goods and services that you think, can actually be commercially viable, and then find buyers for it. It is one of the few businesses that doesn't require a lot of capital, and you can become wildly rich. What's this thing called Facebook? What did he use to develop that? A PC. Think about this. This guy's now worth, 15, 18, 20 billion dollars. And he started with a PC, and you can argue his idea, some other guy's idea, whatever, but developed it, sold it into a community. It was effective. Fast forward 18 years, this guy's worth $20 billion. There is no reason why anyone in here couldn't do that same thing outside of your desire to do it. It's actually not that hard once you learn how to do it. And I'd encourage you all to embrace that on-ramp of software and technology so that hopefully one day you're coming to me saying, you know what, Mr. Smith, I want you to buy my company for $800 million. And I look at it and say, man, it's going to be worth $2 billion to me, and I'm going to offer you 800 because I'm going to make the billion too, okay? But that's what I hope happens. And so, with that, that's why I went into the software business. So the key to this is, again, deciding and having a goal, and then putting some what I call concrete intentions behind that goal. I decided I wanted to be the best investor of my generation. Point number one, okay? Point number two, and like I said, you got to speak that very clearly into the universe. You got to speak that into God's ear and say, here's what I want to do. And then you have to listen to what it is you have to do in order to make that happen. And so a big part of that is, for me, and I knew the intention was very clear for me, I had to go to school. I had to go to the best school I could get into. You all should be demanding from your parents to get into the best, to go to the best schools available. I don't care where they are. If you got to go away to school, then you figure it out, and with your parents, you figure it out. And you parents, quite frankly, you need to demand that the best schools are available to your kids. Because if you don't have that basic level of I'll call it bedrock, then it makes it much more difficult. And I'm not saying you can't, but it makes it much more difficult to get to where you're going. So that was important to me. So I picked up and left Denver, Colorado, and went to Ithaca, New York, because that's where they had the best education that was available to me. And then from there, listened to what the universe was telling me and what God was telling me where I needed to go and how hard I needed to work and what I needed to accomplish in terms of my grades and the internships and the experiences, and frankly demonstrate that I was ready to receive the gifts. All those are important parts of it. First thing is set the goal. Second thing is you got to speak it. And the third thing, you got to make sure all your actions are consistent. You can't say you want that goal and then your actions are inconsistent. You have to be very consistent with your activities. I don't want to speak what they say, but you all know, unfortunately, we have in our community gotten into a bad habit of tearing each other down. It is a horrible thing. It is a horrible habit. And it is one we cannot continue, and you have to stop it every time you see it. I've been called every name under the sun, as you can imagine, okay? And as I tell people, I've been called worse things by better people than the person calling me that, right? So, to a great extent, you cannot listen to that. Your generation is more concerned with likes. You care what people think about you. And listen, we all care what people think about us on the one hand, but you also have to care what you think about yourself. That gets back into you are enough, okay? And you got to say, you know what? First of all, don't listen to what they have to say. That's point number one. Point number two, focus on what it is that you want to accomplish and what you have to do. Look, you know, in school, you know, you'll be, back in the, been called everything, right? You know, from four eyes. Who cares? What matters is you become the person you want to be. And you do the things that are important for you to become that. And you demand the respect of who you are. You got to demand that yourself. And I don't care if they're old or young, whatever. You demand that they respect you for who you are and the choices you make. But be consistent in those actions. Okay, did you ask that question or did your mom make you come up and ask that question?
My mom.
I could tell you she was full. Get up there. So the short answer is my mom used to make me come up and ask those questions too, which answers the question. That was my biggest supporter. She did force me to do things I didn't want to do, and I had all manner of names in my mind because if I said it to him, I was going to get smacked. But I will tell you, it was, you know, her forcing me, her encouragement, my dad's encouragement that made me know that I could be what I wanted to become. And those are important things. And sometimes, you know, your parents get on your nerves, okay, on your last nerve. But I'll tell you, they love you. They mean well for you. And you should listen to them a lot because every now and then they'll give you some advice that's just stupid. But I mean, I got to say that. It's true. I mean, my grandfather, I love my grandfather. I mean, he was a big... But I was working at a place, it was Kraft General Foods, and my granddad's, why would you ever leave that job? It's a good paying job. You're there, you get paid. Why would you ever leave? But you got to follow your heart too. Because I said, Granddad, there's this other thing that you don't know about called investment banking. And these people, he's like, well, look, grandson, if that's what you want to do, I support you in that. But if I'd taken his initial advice, I'd still be sitting at Kraft General Foods. Okay, so there's a fine line. You listen to them, they're great supporters, but part of the support is you got to get your courage from knowing that you know what you want to accomplish, and don't be afraid to do it. But every time your mom tells you to come up to the mic, you come up to the mic, okay? Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Politics is tough, man, but I got to tell you, you can do it. Because you look at some of these fools out here now doing it, right? But in all honesty, a good part of you achieving your goal is speaking it, okay? And then making sure your actions are consistent. Figure out what makes successful politicians. And then you figure out what you need to do in order to support that goal. And part of it might be, you know what, you may need to get some business experience, you may need to get some political experience, you may need to, and all those things are important, but literally sit back and understand what it takes. And then make sure that your actions over the next 15, 20 years support that. And don't waver from that if that's truly one of your, truly your goal in life. That's an important part of reaching and attaining your goals. And good luck to you, and I will vote for you. I guess one of the most successful things I've done in life is get my son to take a shower today. No, I'm teasing you, Max. No, my son, who is sitting here, is a straight A student. His older sister is a straight A student. Their older sister is a straight A student, with exception she now got she's first semester at NYU, got a 3.4, so we had a little conversation about that. And my nephew, their older cousin, is now just getting back into MIT studying engineering. So when I think about what makes me most proud is to see that we as a family can educate our kids and get them launched into this economy and into this world in a way with the right values, with the right goals, and with any luck, because we got a few more years, a mindset of success and accomplishments that make them happy. And in all honesty, that's the thing I'm most proud of. Good question. I have always been this way. And I sincerely mean that. I always knew that I wanted to be a very successful businessman in America. And the journey up till now was all just trying to figure out how, and how to do it uniquely and in my way, and in a way that made me happy with who I was. So when I was your age, yeah, I wanted to be a successful business person because, to be frank with you, I didn't like wearing my brother's clothes. I wanted to buy my own clothes and wear my own shoes that I didn't have to put cardboard in the bottom of them. So that was an important thing when I was your age. And I have the great fortune now that I no longer have those worries. But it's all through hard work and dedication to craft in order to make that happen. Okay. So good luck. Any money? Long time. You know, I was talking to my wife the other day. She and the kids, we had dinner last night. I know the topic came up was when I made my first $1 million. And it has been 20 years when I made my first $1 million from today. And I used to have a little less gray hair. But I enjoyed every second of that journey, enjoy every second of this journey. That you are enough.
Huh?
That you are enough. Running your own race demands trusting yourself even when others don't. Because guess what? There are a lot of people, good people, people who love you, who trust you, and who you love and trust, who want the best for you. And you'll come to them with some ideas about what you want to do and how you want to do it, and they're going to say, that's crazy. Just like when I left my first engineering job at Kraft and I was telling my grandfather I was going back to business school, and he said, that's a great paying job, that's crazy. And when I finished business school and decided to join the tumultuous world of investment banking, my friends and my family spoke up with concerns about my sanity. And when I left Goldman Sachs right after we'd gone public to set up a private equity firm called Vista, my mentors and colleagues at Goldman Sachs thought I was crazy. And to top it all off, when I told them I'm going to start a firm, we're going to focus on enterprise software and not be diversified like all other private equity firms, I was going to hire a team of smart, young, talented people who'd never done this before. Everyone knew I was certifiable. And I did this, of course, in the spring of 2000, about 2 months before the entire tech bubble crashed. Well, all I can tell you is I've never been mad at these folks. In fact, I'm grateful for their advice and their concern. Because in their caution, I found my courage. In their doubts, I found my resolve. And in their warnings, I found my voice and chartered my own journey. And I'm proud of the Vista story. We take risks, we do things differently, and we listen to our own voice. We run our own race, and it has worked. We are now considered to be the #1 private equity firm on the planet and have been so for the last decade. The first and foremost important thing about running your own race is dreaming big. And here I'm called back to my childhood when I was just starting elementary school. At that point in time, the Supreme Court had just ruled that public school districts could pursue desegregation by using forced busing to achieve racial balance in their schools. In fact, I started my own education as a first grader being bused to a school across town, even though my father was a principal at a school 5 blocks away. Although I was a live subject in one of the nation's most controversial legal debates, I frankly didn't know what the big deal was all about, because these kids who didn't look like me sure acted just like me. But desegregation was a big deal to my parents, and leaders of their generations knew that great change was in store, and it was the right thing to do. And they often met with resistance, and often violent resistance. But because of their struggle, their sacrifice, I received a great gift. And that's the gift to dream big. I knew my history. I remembered the pride of my mother telling about when she took me and my brother, brought us back to Washington, D.C., and held me as a 9-month-old during the March on Washington, when Martin Luther King laid out his dream for equal and harmonious meritocratic America. And dreaming big to me meant knowing my history, but not being bound by it. It meant harnessing the past to drive me into the future. It meant grounding myself in who I was and where I came from, so I could soar to become who I wanted to become. The sponsors of Robert Smith's career only did so after I demonstrated that I'm willing to make the commitment to my career. It's a two-way street. It's not just, oh, here's, the person you're going to sponsor, make sure that they get on good deals. No, it is, they see you in the office, you're grinding 100 hours, you're getting it done, you're making sure there's no mistakes, and if there is a mistake, you correct it. You're following up, you're reaching outside of your knowledge to go learn more. When you do that, sponsors are more than happy to then take credit for you. Okay, and that has been my experience, but it has all come through. You gotta demonstrate that that's who you are and that's your priority. If it's Friday night and it's 5 o'clock, your sponsor seeing you leaving because you got, happy hour with your boys, well, guess what? And they're there. You got to be conscious of that sort of stuff. Okay? I like when they come back in on Saturday because they did come back in. I'm wearing the same thing I wore Friday night, right? Okay, this guy's dedicated to his craft. And so when this deal happens, they're happy to stand up in front of the managing principal of the firm at that time to say, hey, Robert did this work. You see what I mean? So it's a two-way street. And sponsors, again, I have the opportunity, and I do in my firm, and build and develop people. But when we do our reviews, part of what we're looking at, do you have that kind of grit? Are you dedicated to this craft? This is not a lifestyle business. And if you want to make it a lifestyle business, this is the wrong business to be in. Okay? So that's, in the world I live in, that's something we think about and we talk about in that context. That's just the nature of it. So we look for, again, I will sponsor those, and even my folks now who have not grown up with me in this business, I sponsored them because I saw them putting that level of effort and energy in 15 years ago, and guess what? They still do it today.